So did we go through this with Iran? Iran, and who controlled Iranian oil? And at first, with Britain. Yeah, Britain. And I did tell you about how missing something here? Oh, I did tell you about 40% went to US oil companies, 40% to Britain. For some reason it's not up there. Yeah. I'll get it. But yeah, we were talking because that's this. I also teach Western Civ, so we were talking about the Congress that we have. Actually, talking about the German unification. And so with that, they went through the whole thing about blowback and the unintended consequences. And we can see September 11th, we can see all of these things happening. And it's not directly or indirectly related. Iran, what a big deal. And so with that, what country, or what is the term for Eisenhower's defense program with the idea of focusing on atomic weapons over conventional because he wanted to end the arms race?
New look.
New look. New look. That was new look. And what did you say? Oh, we got, yeah. And yeah, brinksmanship was going to the very brink of nuclear war. What would it? Who had the two islands of Quemoy and Matsu that the United States almost went to at least threaten nuclear war? Yeah, Taiwan, the People's Republic wanted it. And so the US started using the CIA. People did not know this. Now they knew it in Iran, but they didn't know it in the United States. And then of course you can imagine this top secret thing. There's going to be, once you keep something secret, there's going to be all kinds of rumors. There's going to be myths about it. People are going to exaggerate it. So you can imagine how the new government of Iran, now the current government, will really exaggerate the Americans' role. But the America was obviously involved, yes.
But the U.S. ever any French conspiracists that claim that they had done some of the things that would undermine their image to make it look like they hadn't done those things?
Oh, sure. We pay people off. There's a whole disinformation campaign that happens all the time.
So they do disinformation by putting out that.
Potentially, you could do that.
Like saying.
Yeah. Yeah, they do that a lot. Let's get to Guatemala then. Next year, now there's going to be a number of ones. There's going to be the Congo, Indonesia. I mean, but the other one we have to get to is Guatemala. And the reason why this is our backyard, remember big stick diplomacy? And so this is an element of this. So the United States during the Roosevelt administration actually pulled back and very much encouraged democracies. Well, when Truman came, the Cold War got in the way of the full democracy and they turned anti-communism. So there was a homegrown democracy in Guatemala. Guatemala was exceedingly poor. Oh, there's welfare in bananas, but it's exceedingly poor. And yeah,
These bananas by United Fruit.
We're getting there, but you're right.
This is basically Iran.
It's going to be a different way it happened, but yeah. But we have to. These are the two really big ones. But there'll be other smaller ones too, and Syria 48 too. But Arbenz, Fiorella Arbenz was the leader of the president of Guatemala. He was a nationalist. He, much like Mossadegh in Iran, was desperate to try to keep the wealth in Guatemala, seeing this terrible poverty. And his plan was to deal with what they called the octopus. Yes, United Fruit. United Fruit controlled most of the arable land, either by direct ownership, or they had made contracts with the big wealthy landlords who were Guatemalan, but they controlled the rest of the land. Almost all the arable land that's good for bananas. This is an actual United Fruit advertisement. And I can't make this a gun smoking banana saying United Fruit. I thought that was fake. I thought that was somebody did it to kind of show United Fruit's control. No, it's real. Well, his plan was called land reform. And land reform is basically buy the land from United Fruit, so force United Fruit to sell, which the government can do, and then give that land to peasants. And allow the peasants to cultivate that land, I mean, there's hitches in there, how much land, there's issues with it, but that's the plan. Force United Fruit to sell. Then peasants grow the bananas, and then figure out a way to get those to market. Well, United Fruit absolutely freaked out. But they've learned their lesson. They didn't freak out and say, how dare they take this land that we kind of stole back in 1910. No, they said that our Benz was a what? A communist. Now, he wasn't a communist. There were communists in their parliament, but he was not. But that's what they said. And so here's a poster supporting land reform right here. So land reform is going to take own land and give it to people who don't deserve it. Dulles was actually a big shareholder in United Fruit. So there's a definite conflict of interest. But conflict of interest like that are not really illegal in the United States. All you have to do is look at the American Supreme Court right now. It's not illegal, which is kind of shocking to most observers around the world. But back to this. So the CIA got involved in another secret operation. So many of the same people who were involved in Iran came here thinking that they were experts. And what they did is they set up base in Honduras. Honduras had a very pliant dictator. And United Fruit controlled that too. And what they did is they created an army of exiles. Here are some of them training. And this was a hodgepodge group of poor peasants, former soldiers of the former Guatemalan dictatorship, some absolute criminals. It was really just a mess. And they found a leader. They found a colonel who had been turned down for promotion, a rival of our Benz named Armas, right here, with a very unfortunate mustache. Armas would be given command of this by the United States CIA. But it was presented at, they did newsreel film, they said cameras down there, that this was a homegrown anti-communist effort in Honduras, even though it was all completely operated by the CIA. Yeah. A good way to put it is they gave him control over the fake Guatemalan army they were training in. Does that make sense? Even though in reality, the CIA was totally in control. And I'll get to that in just 1 second. They even had a few old World War II era planes that they said was part of this exile, this army in exile Air Force, and it was all flown by CIA pilots. They even had a radio station set up, operated by the CIA to broadcast propaganda into Guatemala. And their plan was they would invade, cross the border, and they sincerely believed that the Arbenz government was so corrupt or ready to topple that this would trigger a, I thought I put down there. Okay, I thought about typing something and I didn't. Someday you too will be relatively senile. The word is this. The plan was to trigger a popular uprising. To trigger this popular uprising. They could figure they crossed, the people of Guatemala would rise up, uprising. And so they invaded. Did it work? No, just a couple border guards. Guatemala didn't really have an army. They just basically just stopped them and asked them for their passports, and they all ran away. It fell apart, but the CIA understood something. Propaganda. They understood the value of propaganda and the power of the United States. And so they broadcast their radio station, constant news into Guatemala City, that this army that literally ran away, this army was on the march, winning victory after victory after victory. They jammed Guatemalan radio station, the United States did, so they couldn't broadcast anything. That fake Air Force buzzed Guatemala City and dropped small bombs. Guatemala didn't have an Air Force. So it made it feel like they're losing. And then when the radio report said that the invading army was getting closer, they put big speakers on the roof of the US Embassy and broadcast battle sounds from World War II movies. And it worked. Arbenz panicked, realized the United States is not going to stop to take out my government. Sorry. And here's Armas riding into town, riding into Guatemala City. See the driver? CIA. CIA. This was all secret, would not come out fully into the 1970s in the US, but who knew the CIA put them in there? Guatemala and all over Latin America. There's a reason why in 1959, when Vice President Nixon went down to Caracas and did this kind of Latin America goodwill tour, his car was attacked in Caracas, Venezuela, with bottles, and they actually bodily started shaking to try to break the window. And people back in America are like, why are they mad? They knew about this, and Americans did. But the United States said this was democracy on the march. But of course, the CIA is going to establish a pretty nasty dictatorship that would last until the 1980s. And the same power dynamic exists in Guatemala today. They technically have a democracy, but the poverty rate is shockingly high. Most of the land is owned by just a few people, or Chiquita, which is United Fruit. And that's the reason why gangs are dominating Guatemala. So many Guatemalans are fleeing for their life and some trying to get into the United States. Things happen for a reason. And this was seen as a great victory, unlike the postage stamp. So we got to know two of them. There'll be other ones, but these are the biggies. But both times the US would say that democracy is on the march. Yeah. Latin America. So it's in the Isthmus of Panama, or sorry, the Isthmus of Latin America. Right there. And so with that, oh, democracy on the march. Let's get to French Indochina. So French Indochina, French colony, they took in the 1880s, 1890s. And today it's the countries of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. After World War II, France desperately wanted to keep their colonies. Partially because France was so humiliated after World War II, or during World War II, when they were taken in 1940 by the Germans, that they did everything they could to try to reestablish themselves as a world power. So what did they think would do that? Get their colonies. And so they are going to, after the Japanese left, they came in and brutally tried to take control. There had been a civil war before by nationalists, mostly Vietnamese who lived along this area right here, demanding independent nations. Franklin Roosevelt was for Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos becoming independent. He wanted to get rid of colonization. And he was going to use the power of the United States to do this after the war, but he died. Truman came in, Cold War exploded, and now it became, are we helping the communists or the free world? And so, those fighting for independence were called the Viet Minh. There were some Cambodian Laos, but they were mostly along the border. And these were nationalists. They wanted their own country, Vietnam. The leader was Ho Chi Minh, a former teacher. He was at Versailles, actually, back in 1919, asking for independence during the Paris peace talks after World War I. It was totally ignored. Here's Ho Chi Minh with U.S. Army advisors. The United States Army sent advisors in World War II in 44 and 45 and weapons to the Viet Minh because they were fighting the Japanese. And then, of course, the United States abandoned that. Similar thing happened with Mao and Chiang Kai-shek in China. And so the French, they tried to declare independence. The French kicked them out, and then a guerrilla war started. And a really nasty guerrilla war. At first, like I said, the United States was relatively favorable, but then it came out that Ho Chi Minh, who was a socialist, therefore is a communist. He is a communist. Remember, communism is a form of socialism. We don't know what Ho Chi Minh would have done if he had actually taken power of one Vietnam, because he never did. There'd be a civil war that would go on until 1975, and he died in 1969. And by then, he was quite old by the late 1950s. But remember the domino theory. And so now the United States is going to defend a French colony from people who want to be independent, because communism there might spread to the Philippines and then eventually where? Wyoming. Right? Don't forget, all roads lead to Laramie. And,
Laramie,
but Laramie's where the University of Wyoming's at. Cheyenne Scout. Who's been to the University of Wyoming? Why do you think we're brown and gold at Capitol? That's why. Copied Wyoming's colors. So that's who we blame. I mean, yeah. Makes us unique. So, the United States, it took a while, but by 1948, they started sending significant numbers of weapons. We're thinking we want France to be strong because of NATO. So we're helping France because of Europe in Vietnam. It really doesn't have much to do with Vietnam. It might be a strategic location. You could argue there's rubber there, but that's it. By 1950, the United States is giving France almost half of the money necessary for the war. And by 54, France was losing. They could control around the city. Most of the fighting was up here in mountainous jungle regions. They controlled this. But anytime they would leave that coastal region around Hanoi, they would go into the mountains and it would be ambush hell. You can imagine jungle, mountains, how easy it would be to hit and run attacks. And so the French, here are French soldiers right here, and they have American helmets. They decided by 54 to stay out. In fact, the only reason they're staying is because the United States is now saying, you have to win because of the domino theory. But also, don't forget, the US had just got out of Korea by 54. And the United States fought the People's Republic of China in Korea. And what is on the northern border of Vietnam? China. Now, China and Vietnam have an age-old hatred of each other. But at this moment, the enemy of my enemy becomes your friend. Yeah. Remember, the domino theory is if one country falls to communism, that means its neighbors will always accept it. So if one country falls, its neighbor will fall. Like a row of dominoes. And then the next neighbor, and then the next neighbor, and then the next neighbor. Now, that totally discounts every country has different issue. But it's very simple for domestic politics. Yes, sir. Okay. And so with that, the French tried one more maneuver up here, away from areas they could protect. Right here was a place called Dien Bien Phu. And Dien Bien Phu, the French dropped in to cut off the supply line. They used paratroopers. Paratroopers have a great advantage because they could surprise guerrilla fighters that would always kind of drift into the jungle when superior forces came. The problem with paratroopers are, how do you get them out? They can't jump back up into the plane. And when they landed there, they cut off the supply line, but then they got surrounded. And they were surrounded by the Viet Minh. This is French paratroopers dropping into Dien Bien Phu. And it's surrounded by low mountains. And the Viet Minh drug artillery, drug anti-aircraft guns, and pretty soon the French are starving. And going into the summer of 1954, the French are desperate because the French are looking for actually a way out. But now we have this potential humiliating defeat. They can't pull the troops out. They can't go by road because they can't control the jungles. Too many ambushes. They went to the United States. They went to President Eisenhower. And they asked Eisenhower, and asked Eisenhower for support. And Eisenhower seriously considered using nuclear weapons. Seriously considered it. Some small atomic bombs to relieve the French. So he's talking, atomic war for a French colony. He went to the Senate Majority Leader, a young senator from Texas, but was also the master of the Senate. But I'm not going to tell you now. And he went to the Senate Majority Leader and a Democrat from Texas. And he would say, will you be willing to support me if I use American forces, including nuclear weapons? And that Senate Majority Leader said, no, that would be insane. So the United States did not support it. Does anybody know who that Senate Majority Leader was?
Abraham Lincoln in disguise.
Lyndon Johnson, LBJ.
I said that.
Oh, I didn't hear it. I'm sorry. I think you said something else.
You said no.
Hey, they get totally different. I didn't want to give you the credit. No, let's put my negative one in there. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Lyndon Johnson. Why is this ironic? You know what, go ahead.
You would, escalate the.
Yeah, he'd be the one to commit American forces to the Civil War in South Vietnam. He'd be the president. Lyndon Johnson. Kind of part of the whole tragedy of the Vietnam War. The president who did it knew back in 54 how crazy this was. So the French surrendered. Here, French soldiers, French POWs being let out, and I should add the Vietnam treated them quite well. They're bargaining chips. This flying the Vietnam flag, which is now the flag of Vietnam today. That would be, if that's memorialized, there's statues of this. Yes. Yeah, they're treated very well. Yeah, by standards of POWs. Yeah, they treated them very well. And then with that, so France way lost, and eventually they're going to pull out, and this would lead to what's called the Geneva Accords. The event in Geneva, there's a lot of peace talks in Geneva because they built all these great buildings for the League of Nations, and now they were empty. So they still meet there. That's why. And they set up 4 countries. You can see them right here. Cambodia and Laos, within North Vietnam and South Vietnam, with the caveat. And a year after the countries are established, so that's a floating time period, but within a year, there'll be elections to unify North and South Vietnam. VNM is an abbreviation for Vietnam. Be elections. So everyone got that? That's the plan. To unite them. So there'll be one election. And so the thought was there'll be a lot of anger after the war, and so they'll let things kind of settle. There were a lot more pro-French Vietnamese down here, maybe not pro-French, but anti-Ho Chi Minh. And so the thought was to let things balance out after the Civil War, then they'll have an election to unify Vietnam. Well, the United States, which was not party to this, even though this is Secretary of State Dulles pointing at the map, this is a picture of that map. Excuse me. But the US was totally opposed to this, as they thought the French are abandoning American interests, our world interests, by helping communism. And so the US convinced the South to stop, or they nixed the elections. The US said, or South Vietnam would say, with American support, there's no need for elections. The North Vietnamese are going to cheat. The elections will be corrupt. Ho Chi Minh is an evil communist. Unify, which would have been what it basically meant was they would unify the country under one government, and everybody knew Ho Chi Minh would win overwhelmingly. It wouldn't even be close. His party would win, and so that is the beginning of the Vietnam War, right there. That's the beginning, because what it's going to be is this: the United States then will step in, and now our goal to Vietnam, or a better way to look at it, is a permanent Vietnam, South Vietnam. A permanent South Vietnam. And so everybody else wants one Vietnam, one unified Vietnam versus 2. Well, an anti-French fighter by the name of Nguyen Sam. Sam, here is a picture of him. Here's Sam meeting Eisenhower. He would become, okay, he was going to set up a democracy, but he's going to be a dictator till they can write the Constitution and have elections, meaning he was going to be a dictator. And he was unpopular in South Vietnam, not only because he hadn't been in Vietnam, he was known as being a little bit corrupt, but he was also Catholic. And Catholic in a majority Buddhist country looked like he was too French. Remember, the French were Catholic. But there's something else. If you look at this, remember NATO? The United States created an alliance of Southeast Asia, the same kind of thing, called CETO. And the US made him a CETO ally. So we included him in CETO. CETO is gone. It ended in the 1970s. The only reason I'm mentioning this is so the United States could say it was defending an ally. Yes.
And did the Soviet Union have literally any harder interest in this whole mess. I can just imagine Eisenhower saying, we won South Vietnam, and Eisenhower like, and Stalin's like, honors of Vietnam.
Well, maybe not Stalin anymore, but yes, they supported them a little bit. China supported the Viet Minh a little bit, even though they didn't like each other, but not a lot yet. But once it became a proxy war, they did. Once it became a war where they're kind of fighting for American or Soviet interests. And that would be the Civil War then. Would be the government of Zim. By the way, you notice it's a D, the Vietnamese language, the letter D is either the duh sound or a TZ sound. Language. Really hard for English speakers, you can imagine. So those fighting for the one Vietnam in the South were called the National Liberation Front. Their headquarters was in the North. Most of the fighters were just, for whatever reason, they despised the Zim government. They wanted one Vietnam. They saw Zim as being French, all kinds of reasons. But of course, Zim is going to say and really advertise that the National Liberation Front, this is their flag. They're guerrilla fighters. The National Liberation Front are actually what? Totally communist, and there were communists involved, so I'm not denying that, but it's much more complex than that. And that's why he dubbed them the Vietnamese communists, or as we would know them as the Viet Cong. Viet Cong just simply means Vietnamese communists. And they're fighting for one Vietnam. Has everyone got that? The United States will soon be sending weapons, money, and then by 1958, US soldiers as advisors to train the South Vietnamese Army. The first American soldier to die in the Vietnam War would be 1959. So if you go to the Vietnam War Memorial, that was very controversial when they built it. It goes by order that Americans died. So the first one is 1959. Yes.
That one by like the training there.
Yeah, training, but you're training out in the jungle, you're training with soldiers, and they ran into an ambush. The Viet Cong ambush. Yeah.
Why is it controversial?
We're not quite there yet, but we lost.
Oh,
Yeah, so
so they don't want to honor the people. who died.
exactly. And that's nationalism. We lost because we wouldn't act like it happened. And the design was it's supposed to look like from the air like a knife gash. It was kind of a knife gash into the country. And so people didn't like that. But if you go there, it's pretty remarkable. They did a great job. So with that, a civil war is raging all across South Vietnam. So we hear the Vietnam War. It's a civil war in Vietnam. And without a doubt, the US would not have intervened. The war, it wouldn't have lasted long. The Viet Cong would have won. But the US is going to try to prop up this government. And don't get me wrong, too, there were problems in here because they had soon developed a total war. And to win that war, they became a very nasty totalitarian state. So there's no easy messages here. And with that pretty complex thing, I think we need a palate cleanser. Who's with me? Oh no, there's no sound. You got sing along.
Your speaker is obviously communist.
Valid point. Oh, by the way, I like that a lot of you used this as an example. I thought that was awesome. That was so good. It's an airport. All right. So, while this is going on, 1956 in Hungary, the United States had been promoting, promised that they would aid anybody behind the United. I should put D. I don't know why I put S. So I guess that implies I was around when we're going back in time. But any country behind the Iron Curtain, if they threw out their Stalinist dictator, the U.S. would come to their aid. And Hungary did it. They removed their Stalinist dictator in 56. Boy, Hungary had a nasty dictator. Poor Hungary. They went through a horrible fascist dictatorship in 44 called the Four Arrows, replaced by a horrible Stalinist dictator. There's reasons why Hungary has all kinds of issues today with fascism. Yeah, they have a very authoritarian, arguably quasi-fascist, yeah, for Hungary. But here they toppled Stalinist statues. You see, they toppled this because they always fall face first, and so the nose is broke. Whenever you see a statue with a broken nose, that means it's been toppled.
Thanks.
Huh?
Thanks.
Yeah. The Sphinx just fell off. No, French soldiers did not shoot it off. I've been told that. No, but the United States promised it. Well, people cheer this United States freedom on the march. They're going to create this kind of a perfect utopian socialist state they talked about. Well, the Soviet Union was not going to allow this. If it happens in Hungary, it's going to spread here. And look at the map. The US has no allies on Hungary's border. How do we help them? We promised we would help. Now what? So the Soviet Union called the bluff of brinksmanship. Here are Soviet tanks invading, the Soviets invaded. And they crushed the rebellion. Thousands would die. There was a Soviet T-54 tank bashing into a Hungarian storefront where people were throwing Molotov cocktails at them. You see them running away here. Do you know what a Molotov cocktail is? Gasoline, a couple additives I should not tell you, a rag, and you light it.
I'm drunk of you.
Huh?
I drunk of you.
Like the what?
I am drunk of you. What part of that is this?
Oh, I would not. My advice is not to drink a Molotov cocktail. Well, when the last calls from the Hungarian radio station that these dissidents had taken over and the Soviets were taking it, was we're waiting for America. You promised we're waiting for America. And the United States did not come. And that shows the issues of brinksmanship. That shows the issues of a war like that. You can talk, and if you encourage somebody to rebel, what if they do? Are you really going to risk American lives or risk World War III for Hungary? I mean, you can imagine how the Hungarians feel, but are you? I mean, this is going to happen a few other times, most famously in 1991 in Iraq, where we encouraged a revolt and it did nothing. And so this is a real issue. It sounds good in American politics. What are you really going to do for Hungary? The same thing's going to happen in 1968 in Czechoslovakia. And so, what of Stalin? I know I kind of skipped ahead a couple things. There's Stalin, friend of all the kids. These are young pioneers all dancing around Stalin. There's lots of pictures of Stalin with children. Lots of pictures. There's one famous thing of Stalin with his kid, while it had its kid, his parents were in the Gulag as political prisoners. In 1953, Stalin died. Shocking everybody. Stalin was never supposed to die. He was the boogeyman. In fact, people were so scared during the terror of the Soviet Union that when Stalin had a stroke and passed out, his guards were afraid to go get the doctor, and they waited 18 hours because they thought it might be a test and they might be lined up and either shot or sent to the prison camps called the Gulag. That gives you an idea how terrified it was in that monstrous state. But Stalin did die, we think. And I should add, they had a massive state funeral for him. And Stalin, whose terror was responsible for the deaths of millions, but he also won the World War II. He's got this weird kind of cult of personality around this horrible man. At his funeral, people were so sad and distraught that their leader had died, that when they were bringing the body into it, there was a rush to see it as it was led to the Kremlin. That in the rush to see it, over 1,000 people would be crushed to death. So even in death, he brought down people with him. It was going to be a power struggle after he died. I should add, they preserved his body. They did the same thing to Lenin. They preserved his body. And the idea would be Lenin and Stalin side by side. Lenin still is. In 1959, they secretly took Stalin's body and buried it by the Kremlin. And they made a mistake, so he looked kind of yellow, like he had jaundice. But the guards were so scared of all kind, with the terror, and then when they were secretly burying Stalin's body, they're supposed to bury him by the Kremlin wall and stick 20 feet of cement over the body. They didn't want people to dig the body again and use it as a martyr, but they were so scared they just dumped dirt over it and then erode. And so if you go there today, listen to that road. Yes,
People really died.
yeah, over 1,000 people died.
That's,
Yeah, crushed to death,
that's
yes.
not an exaggeration.
No, not exaggeration at all. In fact, it might be understating it. People were so distraught that the leader died. And knowing what we know, what kind of person Stalin is, it seems weird to think about it, but yeah. Of course, Stalin is still by far, if they take a poll in Russia today, by far the most popular leader Russia ever had. By far, it's not even close. Because Russia, the Soviet Union was strong. That's why. Nikita Khrushchev, and you'll notice with the Khrushchev name, there'll be a national, a worldwide shortage of agents. Khrushchev became the new premier, but he was never had never had absolute power like Stalin did. Never again in the Soviet Union will be one person. They'll always talk about it, but it's going to be its key advisors called the Politburo. They're going to have the main power, but Khrushchev. And Khrushchev, get this down about him. He wanted to end the Cold War too and save socialism. So we have this weird situation where there's still tension and hunger in these issues, but you have Eisenhower wanting to end the Cold War and Khrushchev. Maybe something can happen here. They even begin to talk a potential arms control summit. A big step. But Khrushchev felt weak. Then this happened. Sputnik! The Soviets launched the first satellite. The satellite was about this big, not much bigger than a basketball, as you can see a model of it there with that big, that Soviet technician that's faking working on it. And it had a low orbit. Here it is being launched. And it would be launched, and it had this low orbit, and had a little shortwave radio in it that just beeped. Had a battery, and it just beep. Beep. Okay, pretty good, huh? You feel like you can pick it up on radio when it went over on a shortwave radio. And so you can hear it on the ground. In the ground, as you can see it in the low orbit go across the sky, because it's so low, you can see it every time. It eventually burned up in the atmosphere, but wow. And this was a concrete example to many Americans that the Soviets were winning the Cold War. Now, as it turned out, it was much more complex than that. The United States was actually way ahead in rocket technology, but the Soviets rolled the die and it worked. And here's overjoyed Khrushchev. Because Khrushchev knows the value of this as propaganda. Eisenhower at first downplayed it, but he totally underestimated the panic in the United States. Oh, panic. You see the P? It got covered up. Panic. That headline says, now this is a Russian victory. That's from the Herald Journal newspaper in New York City. Not now, but it was pretty big then. I then finally realized, oh no, people are panicking. I got to say something. So Eisenhower turned around and said, well, we are ready to launch a satellite. The Navy team is ready. The Army and Navy were both working on rockets and they were in competition. And the Navy team was told they're ready. Why did Eisenhower pick the Navy? He was an Army general, didn't want to look like he was favoring the Army. So he said the Navy. I'm not making that up. Nobody was more surprised by that announcement than the Navy. And they're like, we don't have anything ready. So they rushed a rocket. And they launched it. And why did they launch from Florida?
Because
Exactly. It can land in the ocean if it crashes. But it goes over the ocean. But that's why, for example, SpaceX, which is mostly funded by the US government, but they do the launches in eastern Texas. They just had a failure today. They had a big, massive rocket that blew up. Yeah. But anyways, whatever. But we're not to that yet. And speaking of blowing up, the rocket made it up 2 feet and exploded. So now we look like bigger idiots. And of course, this is a great headline from a newspaper, the Daily Herald. What a flop, Nick, and a kaput, Nick, and all these kind of things. And so eventually the Army rocket would go up. The Army had better German scientists, Nazi German scientists that we snuck over to work on our rocket program. Yes, we used Nazi German scientists. And NASA, Werner von Braun would use us slave laborers to build the Nazi rocket called the V2, and he would be responsible for the Saturn V rocket that would get the first man on the moon. But back to this. The Soviets are, okay, another one, winning. And this would lead to the Army and Navy team combining to make NASA and an emphasis on science, with the idea that education is falling behind. And this is the first time that the federal government's going to give money to public education, for science and math. There's some issues with that, but the first time, remember the Scopes monkey trial? You remember way back in the 20s? This is the first time the United States started emphasizing science again. Everybody was kind of afraid. And there's a fear of that now. So it's kind of interesting how history kind of evolved. But I like this one. U.S. complacency and thinking we're ahead. I like that cartoon. But we got to get one more big thing for the bell rings. Ike is going as a peacemaker. That's what he really wants. And so even with Sputnik, he actually saw this as a great way. Now, the Soviets are not as paranoid. They might actually have a peace summit in Paris, planned for, at first, 1959, but 1960. And part of the reason Eisenhower was so willing to do this, because he actually knew, despite Sputnik, the US was actually really far ahead in rocket technology. Way far. Not even close. Oh, I should add that Khrushchev came to the United States in 1959, the first state visit by a Soviet leader. And he was supposed to stay for a couple of days. He ended up touring the United States for 2 years. Here he is in Iowa with a cow. And he ended the trip in the brand new Disneyland, which I just find remarkable. American Experience did a great documentary about it. It's hilarious. Yeah.
What is up with the lady's hair?
She's one of the characters from Cinderella, I guess. Or, yeah. Or maybe, yeah, Cinderella. Yeah.
So during two of the final years of the Cold War, the Soviet leader was in the US.
But not the final years of the Cold War.
But
Of the 50s Cold War. Yeah.
two of the years of the Cold War, the Soviet leader was during the US.
Yeah. Now, like Leonid Brezhnev would come over in the 70s, who was during the Cold War too. But let me show you one more thing really quick. Why did we know? Why did we know we were so far ahead? The illegal spy flights. I didn't write this down. Oh, what happened? You see that line right there? That's the U of a U-2. The United States had made a very secret spy plane called the U-2. And it was basically like a big glider, but it could fly almost 60,000 feet above Soviet air defenses. Its cameras were so sensitive that from 60,000 feet, these pictures you could use to read license plates on cars. They were flying incredibly illegal flights over the Soviet Union. The Soviets could pick them up on radar, but their air defenses couldn't get there, even though they were getting closer every year. They couldn't get there. Khrushchev was furious. He complained. But the United States did not stop. Well, he said, no Paris peace talk if these U-2 flights continue. Eisenhower agreed. And then the CIA went to Eisenhower. The CIA did these flights. We need one more flight. One more flight. Over Kazakhstan, they have a rocket development program. Anybody want to guess what's going to happen to that flight? It will be shot down and blow everything up. That will be okay. Now, and remember, that's why I started. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to move some of this. I think I must have changed the frames and background. I don't know how I did that. That's pretty fun. Here, you two, see, I wasn't lying. So, don't forget, put on your galoshes, winter gear, parkas, moon boots. It was just supposed to be a relatively light snow, according to my weather app. That means, and it's supposed to get down below freezing. Oh, that's up inside tomorrow, the review book. I'm excited, yeah, so another review book.
It was something we had to do tonight.
Right, I just put that, yeah, I'm excited tomorrow.
These are the ones for tomorrow, because I'm.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm gonna have you do on. Oh, good,
This is the ones that we're gonna do.
gonna be on tomorrow. Ah, so 8 more. It's very cheap, 218 to 220. Same deal. And when, I thought those questions were pretty.
That's what I did.
You did really well.
Yeah, I missed one.
I thought two other people didn't miss that. That was kind of a weird one.
Okay.
So you did good, very, very good.
Look at all the shirts I found. This is doing work. Filling the taste in 1773.
That's not bad, I like that.
I'm not really a fan of the theater.
I've seen that one before. You're in trouble. Someone's in trouble, I'm tired of it. Look at the snow.
You didn't come prepared for this.
It's just dumping out there. There's gonna be 8 feet of snow pretty soon, 8 feet. Look at the snow. Gage, I'm blaming you for the snow. Look at it. Yeah, use your powers for good. Look at the snow. Look at the snow, I'm blaming you. I'm blaming Ellen now. I'm blaming Brooklyn. William, it's not your fault, I know.
It's all Ella's fault.
Nice job.
What did I do?
Use your powers for good.
Hi, your parents. Mr. Portland, yeah, my mom was like, straight, I was so funny about this, like, that's worth it. Like, broken in and out. It's not like I missed anything. So she's like.
So you're going to California and hang, look, you come here.
No, it's a lot better.
Come over. Look at that.
I know.
Yeah.
It's really great weather.
No, it's
like
not.
70 in
I
California.
hope it rains. I hope. Okay. So, where are you going to California? We'll be doing, so basically finish up the read. I'm gonna kind of pick review things to do. I'm gonna get a couple of this test. So remind me now, I should have, I'll give it to you for a couple. But I'll try to get it tomorrow.
Okay, that's fine.
And the big thing is, we just start that. The question, getting used to them. Oh, let me shut the cameras off. Everybody, remember I collected, hey, you were gone yesterday, right? You got that, what's that? Yeah, you've got 2 days. Do you have that assignment on the review book?
He missed the notice.
You have to get it to me tomorrow. And it's like, okay. But you know what it is, so send it on Monday. You were here Monday. Okay, no, so give it to me tomorrow. Just hold it up for a sec. I gotta shut the camera. We recorded everything. Say goodbye.